Hi everyone, it's Evelyn. Before we get started on anything, I just wanted to thank all of you who have subscribed to my channel over the course of times. I mean, I've been filming for just over 2 years, and I've hit my 1,000 mark, which is of course a big goal that everybody wants to have, because that allows you into the YouTube partner program and also allows you to get monetized. I already had my 4,000 watch hours, which I needed, but again, just a great big huge thank you to everyone who has supported my channel up till now and subscribed to it. And for those of you who haven't subscribed, doesn't mean you can't still subscribe. The other little bit that I wanted to go over is that we're now in March. March's Q&A, which is when you put questions in the comment section down below for me, I will generally answer them in the comment section, but I can go into some of the questions in greater detail when I'm filming a video. So at the end of each month, I will do a Q&A video where I answer some of the questions. I have already answered them, but in much greater detail than I did in the comment section. And that will happen on April 2nd, because that is the first Wednesday after the last March video. So now we're going to go on to what some of my unpopular practices in flower farming are. I've just scribbled them down in some notes. I don't even know if I can read my own writing half the time. Haven't looked at them since I scribbled them down, so bear with me. So the first one that's kind of unpopular, maybe not, but I don't pay any attention to seed depth. Seed depth to me is meaningless, because when seeds come off of flowers in the real world of the gardens and the forests and everything else on the planet, they do not land at a specific depth to the soil. They are where they are. So like for instance, a sweet pea seed, I'll just poke it in. I'm not figuring out oftentimes I'm probably pushing it in way farther than it needs to be. Other seeds I'll just put on the surface and they're supposed to be covered with soil, but I don't. If I have vermiculite on hand, I'll sprinkle it on. If I don't, I won't, and I won't go back and sprinkle it on when I bought it, because that's just an extra step that I don't feel like doing. Our garden grows lots of moss and algae in it anyway, and it's never hurt any plants, so I don't really worry about it too much if it lands on my seedlings either. So that's the first thing that I wanted to go over. And a great example of that is my ranunculus, which I've talked about in a couple of videos already. I know that when I plant them outside, I want to plant the corms at about a 3-inch depth. And that has more to do with temperature, because ranunculus will stop blooming when the corm hits a certain temperature. So when it's hot outside, the lower it is, the longer it takes for the soil to warm up at that depth. But of course, if it's too low, that's not good either. So I will try and plant my ranunculus at about a 3-inch depth, purely because of the flowering season. I want things still to flower when it's starting to get a bit too warm. But I'll put them in the pot, and I'll only put like about this much soil in the bottom of the pot. And are you talking to me? And I won't put them in the dark like everybody says. I'll just put them under my grow lights the way they are, and once they start sprouting, I'll start putting some more dirt on top of them. So then the next thing I wanted to talk about is as long as we're in the seed room, and of course I said dirt words, I should have said soil, but to me it's one and the same thing. The soil that I use in my seed room for starting seeds or corms or bulbs or anything else, I do not buy seed starting mix. I do not buy potting soil. I use the soil for my garden, because I consider that to be the healthiest soil out there, because I direct compost, so it's got lots of really, really good nutrients in the soil. And for that reason, it brings in a lot of the healthy, beneficial bacteria, etc., for the microorganisms. And I can't think of a better thing to start growing my seeds in than that. And if I don't worry too much about bugs, because I put my soil in garbage cans, and if the soil is in the garbage cans through the course of the summer, it gets pretty hot. If the soil is in the garbage can in the winter, usually if we go for a multi-night freeze of -4 or colder Celsius, the soil in the garbage can will freeze. And I like it in the garbage can because it can freeze all the way around as well as through the top. This year, we didn't get the first soil ground freezing until after I needed the soil to start the seeds. So that wasn't until, so I started the seeds on, well, the dahlia tubers I started on February 1st, and the seeds I believe I started on February 3rd, give or take. We hadn't had a ground freeze yet. So it was interesting to see if that actually made a difference. And I will say there was one difference, and that was I've taken out so far 6 teeny tiny newly hatched baby slugs. So that never happened before when I had the ground freeze. So without the soil freezing inside the garbage cans, I have had a small hatching of tiny baby slugs, but I've just simply taken them out. And because I realized that they were there, I did sprinkle in a few extra seeds in some of the seed trays where I was starting, because normally I just start pretty much exactly what I want to start. So that was the only real difference. Now, I mentioned that I like to use my soil because it's healthy, because I do direct composting. So if you haven't seen my, I'm going to call it community posts, but they're actually just called posts now. If you haven't seen my posts, you wouldn't have seen how well, you would have seen this picture because I've had it in previous videos. So this particular picture is how I fill up, I've got 3 garbage cans there that you can see full of soil. And then I'll wheel a wheelbarrow over to them, which has like a filing tote in it, and I will shovel soil from the garbage cans into the file tote and then wheel that into my seed room, take the file tote out and put it on the bench, and that's how I use my soil for seed starting. And I direct compost by digging a trench across whatever flower bed I happen to be working on at that time, and it's only a shovel width trench to the length of the bed. This picture here, it doesn't go the length of the bed because I've got a peony planted there. And I put all of our kitchen scraps in it first at the bottom of the trench. I believe it's about 18 inches deep, give or take. I go down as deep as I can go, and I think that one was 18 inches deep. Then I cover that with prunings from our cedar trees that run our driveway. And then I cover that with whatever dry brown matter I have from the garden, and in this case that is my Cosmos stalks. And then I just fill it up with soil and level it out, and you'll never even know that I had soil in there. So not only do I use more or less the more natural way that seeds land on the soil, or the soil that I use as well, the other thing I don't do is bottom water. I believe that when plants of any sort start sprouting outside in nature, they get watered by the rain, and the rain comes from above. It doesn't come from below. And we are in a rainy climate, so therefore, to me, I prefer to water my seedlings from the top, and I've never had any dampening off doing that. I know they say it encourages the roots to go down low, but frankly, the roots go down and come out the bottom of the pots anyway. So I will always water my seedlings from the top, if for no other reason to get them used to getting wet from above, because that's what's going to happen when they get rained on when they're outside. Along with that, once my seedlings are planted outside, I do not use irrigation systems whatsoever. I, again, believe that they are naturally watered from above from the rain. And so I water them from up above. I'm a tiny urban flower farm, so I can simply stand there with the hose and water everything. And I like to do that because I mimic wind in the rain, and I will hit the stalks of the flowers this direction, that direction, and that creates a stronger plant because I'm purposefully pushing the flowers around while I'm watering them with the hose. I want them to be pushed around because, again, that creates a stronger stem, which means that there's less reason for you to need to do any, well, not again, because I haven't talked about it yet, but it gives you less reason to need to do any staking or netting because you're creating a stronger stalk to that plant when it's getting pushed around a bit by, in this case, the jet from the hose. Not that I do a strong jet, but even the wind itself, because we do get wind as well, that'll knock it around a bit as well. So the other reason that I like to water from up above is because if you Google it, One of the ways to avoid powdery mildew is to water your plants from above and wash your leaves off. So I know a lot of people think that you don't want to get your leaves wet because then you'll get powdery mildew. Well, no, in fact, you're supposed to get your leaves wet to avoid powdery mildew. And I live in a climate where that's very prevalent, powdery mildew. And I only start getting powdery mildew in September. Maybe late August on zucchinis, but other than that, it may show up in a few other things in September, and I never get it on my dahlias at all. So for that reason, I don't water anything from an irrigation system. If my flower farm was too big, or my gardens were too big to only do hand watering, I would use sprinklers for the same reason, because they come from up above. Now, we don't pay for water, so that of course helps. So now, if you haven't already, please consider giving me a thumbs up. Really appreciate the like, and let's carry on. So where are we at now? Let me just take a little scoot down here and see what we're talking about. Okay, we are now going to talk about row covers. I don't like row covers at all, for several reasons. One, I think that once you cover something up with plastic, no matter what it is, it cannot breathe. Just think about putting a plastic suit on. Think about putting plastic shoes on. Your body can't breathe. Well, the soil in your flower beds is a living, breathing entity. The soil itself isn't, but it's full of microbiology. And all that microbiology, including the plant roots, need oxygen. So if you're going to cover the soil up with plastic, you're depriving it of oxygen, which makes no sense to me. I have no idea if I'm right or wrong on this, but to me, it just makes no sense. The other thing is that we have a lot of birds in our garden, and they scratch. They go for weed seeds, they go for bugs, they go for baby slugs, and they do a really, really good job of it. I do not have a weed problem. Of course I get weeds, but I don't have a bad weed problem in my flower beds because the birds are scratching. I don't have a slug issue because the birds eat all the baby slugs. And if they can't scratch at the soil, they can't get at them because the slugs and any other bug will just hide underneath the plastic away from the birds, and the birds can't get at them. And to me, I'd rather the birds ate them than have a bug problem. And I don't have any bug problems. I don't know if that's why, but I don't. If you think about it, okay, well, I'm going to think about it and tell you a little story. When we used to live on Cortez, I paid really close attention to something. I knew that if I planted seedlings out in March, and they were fine. If I planted anything out in April, that's when all the baby slugs hatched from their eggs or whatever. And there would be like probably thousands of microscopic little slugs, and nothing survived in the garden for a plant that was planted out. Everything got mowed down by the slugs as they were munching away and trying to get bigger. And then come May, there was no more slugs. But all the birds had showed up in March. And they were starting to eat the slugs, but the slugs, of course, on Cortez, because it was a different environment than here, because we weren't in the city there, they had a bit of a head start so that some of them would survive, but the birds really, really did a number on them. So that's why I've always known that birds really clean out slugs, and so here I am in the city. I don't have the intense populations that we had on Cortez, so I don't worry about planting out in April at all. And the birds just take care of them. So, I mean, it's almost surprising if I see a full-grown slug on my property. Now, granted, they probably go to my neighbors' properties all around me, except for one, because the other 3 neighbors don't really worry about the environment of their gardens. Like, they're kind of overgrown and weedy and all that sort of stuff, so they make perfect environments for slugs, so why would they come into my yard when they can like their yards better? I don't know if that's true or not. The other thing I do with slugs to make sure that they don't like my environment is I try not to water in the evening, because then they could move in from the neighbors into my property, so I try to avoid watering later on in the evening. But mainly it's the birds that are taking care of them. So we were talking about row covers and how I don't like using row covers for those reasons. Well, the other thing I don't like using is netting for my flowers, because a lot of flower farmers put out the netting so about 6 inches off the ground or 12 inches off the ground, and they got like a 6-inch net, and the flower stalks can grow through, and it stops them from falling over. I won't do that. I just think that would be a pain to take away. I don't even like using cattle paneling, because once the annuals have died back, you've got all this dead plant matter in there that you got to clean out. I don't have the patience for that. Well, and I don't stake either. So like my dahlias aren't staked. I'm not using netting on them. I'm not using stakes or netting on snapdragons, cosmos, or anything like that. In fact, I don't use anything on my cosmos. I use the direct spray of the hoses to create those stronger stems. And then, to avoid any flopping over in bad wind, I will put stakes in the corners of the bed, and depending on the length of the flower bed, maybe halfway through too. And I will just take twine and run it around the bed at whatever height I feel appropriate for whatever the flower is. And like for the dahlias, it's usually about a foot up off the ground, the first one. And then I might do a second one at about the 3-foot mark. So then the outside of the beds, they can't tip those ways. But I also plant them close enough so that the flowers themselves hold each other up. So like with the snapdragons, I plant them about 3 inches apart. So they're right up against each other. So the only way they're going to fall over is if the whole block, 4-foot wide block of them, is going to fall over. But it can't, because it's got twine around it. So for that reason, I don't like using Hortonova netting either. So let me just look at my notes and see where I am, because I am just been talking off script. Not that I have a script, I just have sort of like some scribbles down here. And I am now going to say that my next really unpopular opinion is that I don't sterilize anything. I don't understand why so many people sterilize their plant pots and their flower buckets and all these things. I mean, your plants grow in the garden. That's not a sterile environment. Why do they need a sterilized plant pot to grow in? Well, the reasoning is that to keep diseases at bay, but was what was growing in there diseased? Because if it was, you wouldn't have planted it outside. I don't sterilize my plant pots. Once I take the plant out, the plant pot just goes stored until it gets needed again. I do store them in really, really large Rubbermaid containers so that spiders and things can't move in and have little happy homes in them with the lids on. So all my small plant pots are in there stored, or they're in my seed room stored until the next year. So there isn't any bugs that are going to go in there and make themselves at home, because there's no food for them or water for them in there. And frankly, they'd have to get in there somehow too. So yeah, nothing gets cleaned in my seed room from one year to the next. And I don't sterilize my water containers that I hold flowers in either. Literally, I will just once a day dump the water, do a quick rinse, put in fresh water, and away we go. So over the course of my flower wagon season, not once have I sterilized a water container that bouquets sit in. But we do have chlorine in our water system for the city, and that is why there is chlorine in the water, to stop bacteria from growing in the pipes from the plant that does the UV sterilization of everything. It still has to get from the UV sterilization plant all the way through the pipes to your home, and that's why they put chlorine in the water, is to stop any form of bacteria from growing. So why would bacteria then grow in a pot of water that's only being used for over the course of one day? So I don't sterilize those either. And I don't use any kind of flower food or any of those other things. It's just water out of the tap, specifically water out of the tap, because it does have the chlorine in it, which is in its own way a form of cleaning things. And yeah, so that's my other unpopular thing that I do. So another unpopular opinion of mine is that weeds are my friends. Weeds create a living mulch over the surface of your soil. By creating a living mulch, they do several things. They bring in the birds, because the birds are really interested in checking around them for bugs, etc. They create a cover to the soil so that the soil doesn't dry out as much. Now, I hear a lot of people saying pull up your weeds because they're taking water away from your plants. However, I don't have any weeds or mulch on my paths in between my flower beds in my backyard, and they're just basically soil or dirt, and then the flower bed is soil. So the only difference is that are things growing in the flower beds, and they may have some really low growing weeds on them as well. Well, the soil in the flower beds is much wetter than the soil in the paths. So the soil that is completely exposed to the sun dries out much faster than the soil in the flower beds, even though they've got so many more roots drinking up the moisture that's in the soil. And the other thing about letting the weeds grow, now of course if it's a bad weed like bindweed, I'm not going to leave that in there. I'm going to pull that up. Or the things that I will pull up is bindweed, ivy, brambles. Do I pull up anything else? That's pretty much it. All the other weeds, as long as they're low and not becoming a nuisance, I will let them stay as a living mulch. The minute they become a nuisance, I will pull them up, and I will either compost them immediately with my next batch of composting, or leave them out in the path to dry out. So like my marjoram that becomes a bit weedy, when I pull it up, I'll leave it out to dry out, because if I simply put it into the direct composting, it probably won't die, it'll probably grow. So there are things that I will pull up once they become annoying and leave them out to dry, and then they become compost. And there are other weeds that, let's say I'm going to start planting an area, I'll weed that area out, and that will become fresh compost in my little composting beds. But weeds are my friend, because they attract the birds, they create ground cover, they turn into compost. And did I miss anything out? Nope, that's it. So I've talked a few times now about how I have really, really healthy soil, and I do what I can to keep it really healthy. And one thing I don't do and will never do is fertilize my soil or my plants. Because when you fertilize, you're bringing food for the plants, not for the soil. So you're not leaving anything that is residual to keep the soil health or the microbiology health or the roots health. So that is why, again, I do the direct composting. Now, it's not necessarily the food that you put into the direct composting system, whether it's from your kitchen or whether it's weeds or whatever, but that brings in the little critters that like to eat that stuff. Specifically, I'm thinking of worms. My garden beds are so full of worms, it's not funny. Well, worms, when they're eating away at your compost that you dug into your soil there, feasting madly away, they're pooping madly away, which is called worm castings. And that is one of the healthiest things you can put in your soil for your plants, is worm castings. People buy it by the bag. Well, I don't need to buy it by the bag. I just put in my direct compost. It attracts all the worms in, and they create their worm castings, and my soil is so full of it. Same as in the garbage cans that I fill up with the soil that I hold over to use for my seed starting in the spring. The worms that are in there never die off, because the cold doesn't kill the worms. If the soil freezes, the worms are fine. So they're in there feasting off on any little plant debris that's in there, filling up those garbage cans of soil that I'm going to use for seed starting with worm castings. So they're inoculating my soil for my seedlings, and then my seedlings are going from a type of soil right back into the same type of soil, so that there's no change of environment for the roots. And the seedlings just carry on as happy as can be. It's just a great little system. And my seedlings hardly show any kind of transplant shock when I transplant them, which is great. Oh yeah, one more thing about weeds that I forgot to mention is by allowing weeds to grow as a living mulch underneath your flowers, you are taking any clump of any type of flower out of its monocrop situation into a diverse plant environment, because the weeds are creating the diversity of plants that are growing. And that's super important as well. And then the final unpopular thing that I do that I'm going to talk about in this video is the fact that I don't think using tulips or daffodils or hyacinths in bouquets is cost efficient simply because of the amount of times you have to go out there and harvest them when they're at the right stage of harvesting. I mean, from what I've seen, flower farmers have to go out multiple times each day to harvest them at the right size of opening. I'm not going out and harvesting multiple times a day. And then if the bouquet doesn't sell, it's not good to be used anymore, so then it has to get tossed, and bulbs are one of the most expensive things you can plant for that. So I will not use tulips, daffodils, or hyacinths in bouquets, but I will sell them in pots, 3 bulbs per 1 gallon pot. And I think that is a far more efficient way to sell them, and I think it is a far more profitable way to sell them. And if you want to know how I do the breakdown on the profits of selling bulbs in pots, you should check out this video over here. See you next week. Bye.